Have you ever wondered how far a motorcycle can travel on a single tank of fuel? Well, here's my pick of the top 10. Number 2 probably won't surprise you, but number 1 almost certainly will. And yes, I've used the official consumption figures from the manufacturer's websites, so real-world range may well be a little bit less, especially if you like to ride a bit quicker. First up, we've got the Kawasaki Versys 650, a solid all-rounder that's been on the market for some time now, and not much has really changed with it. At the heart, you've got their proven 650 parallel twin, which isn't the most soulful sounding with its 180-degree crank, and it's not the most powerful in its middleweight tall tourer market segment either. It makes around the 66 horsepower mark, which means it isn't exactly lightning quick considering it's well over 200 kilograms. But it is economical at 4.4 liters of fuel consumed per 100 kilometers traveled, and you do get a pretty substantial fuel tank. 21 liters to be precise, which is far larger than the competition. So the Yamaha Tracer 7, for example, gets a 17-liter tank, and Triumph's Tiger Sport 660 gets 17.2. So neither of those bikes get even close to the top 10 of this list. Those other two options might give you a bit more power and sporty handling, but if you just want a solid commuter or affordable tourer that will go as far as possible between stops, then the Kawasaki is your bike. Next up, something a little more little, it's the Royal Enfield Hunter 350. And so with a fairly small retro like this, you're probably not expecting a huge fuel tank, and you'd be right, it's just 13 liters. But this 350 air-cooled single from Enfield is super fuel efficient at 2.65 liters per 100 kilometers, which isn't far off half that of the Kawasaki we just looked at. That gives it theoretically almost 500 kilometers of range, or just over 300 miles, which is plenty for a bike that would make a great little city commuter. Again, it shouldn't be a huge surprise that it sips on fuel because this bike makes just over 20 horsepower, so it's certainly not a bike for the adrenaline junkies out there, but an impressive distance all the same, and it even beats their own Himalayan adventure bike according to their own figures, because while that bike gets a slightly larger 15-litre fuel tank, it is significantly worse on fuel. In at joint 7th, we got the Honda Africa Twin Adventure Sports, which is a slightly bigger, more touring-focused version of the Africa Twin. Now this bike is powered by their 1100cc parallel twin, and you'll also find that engine in the NT 1100 Tourer and the Rebel 1100 Cruiser, and it's alright on fuel to be fair, 4.9 liters per 100 kilometers, which is to be expected for a large capacity bike like this. But on the Adventure Sports, it's the 24.8 liter tank, which helps it to reach this reasonable position on the list, and that translates to over 500 kilometers or about 314 miles. The other benefit of this big tank is that it does provide a little extra wind protection, which again helps with distance riding. I've been lucky enough to borrow one of these for a few weeks, and I used it for some longer trips, and it was super impressive. And perhaps the power figures might not make it seem like it's right up there with the proper big capacity adventure bikes, but in terms of actual usability on the road, for me, it's pretty close. Also in at 7th, and also from Honda, can you guess which bike has the exact same range? Nope, not the Goldwing. That bike has a big, thirsty 1.8 litre engine with only a modest 21 litre tank. It's actually something far more humble and understated, and that's the CB500X. It's pretty much like a baby Africa Twin in terms of looks, plus it's got that adventure bike stance and wheel sizes. It's a parallel twin too, although it's less than half the capacity, and yet it still gets a pretty substantial 17.7 litre tank. Just 3.5 litres consumed per 100 kilometers, and so by my calculations, that makes it near enough the exact same as the Africa Twin Adventure Sports, which is very impressive indeed. Just beating it there into 6th spot, we've got one of the best-selling touring bikes on the market, the BMW R1250 RT. This bike gets their 1250 Boxer twin with its smooth and torquey power delivery, and in this most recent iteration it gets the shift cam variable valve timing and lift system, which has 2 cam profiles, so it can switch between them using an electronically actuated gate on the camshaft. One cam profile gives you more torque and fuel economy in the lower revs at a moderate throttle, whereas the other gives you more revvy top-end power and fun. So that's how they've managed to get 4.75 liters per 100 kilometers out of it, which is super impressive for a big 1250 twin with decent performance figures of 136 horsepower peak and 143 newton meters of peak torque. Combine that with a respectable 25 liter tank, and you've got a recipe for knocking out steady touring miles in buttery smooth comfort. But now for something completely different, and it's the Yamaha Tenere 700 World Raid. This bike is a bit of a beast. It's super tall, it's got brilliant suspension, and it also gets a larger 23-litre tank versus the standard bike's 16 litres. And the idea is that it's set up for some rally raid style action with plenty of off-roading and long stints between fill-ups. But the thing is, it's still using their fairly modest 689cc CP2 parallel twin that you'll also find in their other bikes like the MT-07 middleweight naked. 72 horsepower peak is all it'll make, but realistically, if you're mainly riding off-road, you don't need much more, and it keeps things pretty sensible on the fuel front, which is handy for this list. 4.3 litres per 100 kilometers gives it 535 kilometers or 332 miles of range, and after 331 miles of off-roading, I'm usually ready for a stop anyway. At 4, we've got BMW's middleweight long-range adventurer, the F850 GS Adventure. And although the Tenere 700 typically gets the majority of the plaudits for its off-road ability, this bike might actually be a good shout if you're looking for a bit more of an all-rounder but still with that off-tarmac bias. After all, the Tenere World Raid is a fairly simple bike, and yet it still comes in at a fairly hefty price tag of just shy of 12 grand, yet for 11,750 you can get the most basic spec on this bike, which I think looks like a relatively good deal. There's a bit more punch with 95 horsepower peak, it's good on fuel at 4.2 litres per 100 kilometers, and it gets the same 23-litre tank capacity as the Yamaha, so that marginally better consumption just gets its nose ahead. In at 3 though, we've got one of the proper big boys, the adventure bikes with the 30-litre fuel tanks, and it's the Triumph Tiger 1200 GT or Rally Explorer. The GT is the most touring bias spec of this big machine, so you get all the tech features, you get radar-enabled blind spot warnings, all the goodies from the accessories catalogue like heated seats and grips, but chiefly that 30-litre tank is a massive bonus when it comes to its ability to cover distance. In fact, there are only 3 bikes currently on the market with that size of tank. Firstly, the Multistrada V4 Rally from Ducati, although that bike is so aggressive on fuel at 6.6 litres per 100 kilometers that it didn't even make the top 10 on this list despite the massive fuel tank. Then there's this Tiger at a much more respectable 5.1 litres, but the king of the distance adventurers is still the BMW R1250 GS Adventure with that same shift cam boxer as the RT, so 4.75 litres per 100 kilometers. Combined with a 30-litre tank, that makes 632 kilometers or 392 miles, and so it has to be said, that is rather a lot. So perhaps not a big surprise that it's so high on this list. It's a well-known bike for its range abilities, but what I've missed out so far is all of the 125s, because if I included them, this list would just be absolutely full of them. And the thing is, you can't realistically do the same sort of touring in comfort at motorway speeds as the rest of the bikes on this list. But look, just take the modest CB125F from Honda as one of the most impressive examples. When they last updated it for 2021, they put a load of work into the engine, and they actually got 27% more fuel efficiency out of it. And so even though the tank is only 11 litres, it only needs 1.5 litres of fuel for every 100 kilometers traveled, and that gives it well over 700 kilometers or 450 miles of range, which is absolute madness. So there you have it. If you just want to get around town and barely ever pay for fuel, 10-ish horsepower is probably enough, and the CB125F will do the trick. But if you want to do some proper touring, then it looks like one of the BMWs looks like your best bet. Plus, there's a new large capacity GS on the way sometime this year, and we've already seen the spy shots. So if you want to get the lowdown on what's likely to be included on the latest and greatest R1300 GS, then please do hit the video on the screen now and give it a watch. Let us know which bike you like most in the comments below. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next one.